I had a client who had a client in a wheelchair for years. The client was apparently loved the gym the entire time that client was a client of that gym until there was an issue, and then that client left and called the Department of Justice and made a claim that the gym was not ADA compliant. The Department of Justice came down on that gym hard. We went to the landlord. We pulled the lease and we went to the landlord. I went to the Department of Justice and I said, you got to pull the landlord in this as well, because the ADA says owners and operators are both liable. So the building owner, the landlord, and the gym owner are technically both liable under the ADA, except the lease said that the tenant, because they didn't have us review it beforehand, the tenant agreed to indemnify the landlord from any issues that came up from an ADA violation. So, the first offense for an ADA violation can be upwards of $100,000 fine. So it's a big deal, and there's different ways we'll work with the gym owner through those issues, but more often than not, it's just you either need to go back to the landlord and get written confirmation from the landlord that the space is ADA compliant, or you got to work with the landlord to try to get the space compliant, or you understand that there's a potential issue that's going to pop up down the road and you're accepting that as a potential risk.
This is the Reinforce Your Gym podcast with your host, Dustin Vogel. This show is about arming gym owners with the tools, strategies, and lessons they need to take their business to the next level. That way, they can make a greater impact in their community. Now, let's get to work and reinforce your gym.
All right, guys, welcome into the Reinforce Your Gym podcast. I got a special guest today. He's going to help us with all things legal, and that is the stuff that most gym owners don't want to tackle. It's the not sexy side of business. So thank you for what you do. My guest today is Matthew Becker with Gym Lawyers. Matthew, you ready to do this, my friend?
Oh yeah, Dustin. Let's try to make the law sexy part of your business, and we won't fail miserably. Let's try it, because it is interesting stuff.
It's not sexy till it hits you, right? And then
and it is really not sexy.
so that's what we're here to alleviate, is the pain. So what I did, just for the listeners to know, I actually went to our customers at GR and I said, hey, what are problems that you've had with legal, or problems you foresee coming, or worries that are in your head? And submit them to me, and then I'm going to basically ask them to Matt live here on the podcast. So I got a bunch of questions, and so they're very wide-ranging. So we're going to cover things like fees. We're going to cover things like leases. If we have time, we'll get into acquisitions. So it's going to be kind of like a lot of different topics.
Right. All over the place. Yeah, so just a fast disclaimer. Nobody can hear the answers to these questions and take them as legal advice, because chances are, while it may sound similar to your situation, it's probably different, because every situation is nuanced, and I will do my best not to give the standard "it depends" attorney answer. So I will do my best to give a straight answer to whatever you ask.
Love it. So that's how you guys know he's a professional, because no one would do that except someone in the legal world, right? So, Matt, just before we dive in, we know the number one question we got to scratch on everyone's mind is like, why should I listen to you? So what's just a snapshot version of your background story? Why applying your legal skills to the fitness industry? Because there's so many industries you could apply it to. So kind of.
Yeah. So I was a litigating attorney in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the better part of a decade. Started practicing, I think, 2009. Yeah. And I closed my legal practice right around 18 or 19. While I was doing that, 2013, I opened up my own CrossFit gym. So I was a full-time attorney and a full-time affiliate owner at the same time, and grew the gym up enough that it could actually support me financially as a sole source of income. So litigating and practicing the law, I thought, was quite a miserable profession. And I'll still be very truthful. Like when law students call, they're like, should I be an attorney? And be like, well, let's talk about that, because, it's not a happy profession. It's not like going into a gym and your clients come in and you can help them reach their goals. Everybody high fives. And they're like, yeah, it's the best time of day being at your gym. Nobody calls me at the law office and tells me it's the best time of their day to talk to me. So it's just kind of miserable. So I was a sole owner of a gym for, 1 year. And then like you said, there's all kinds of different places that we can apply the law, but nobody besides me at that time, or even still, is helping gym owners with navigating the legal system. So, I just sold my gym this year. I mean, at 11 years as a gym owner, I think I have a very unique perspective that you either go to a gym owner and they have no idea what's involved with the law because they don't need to, or you go to an attorney and they have no idea what's involved with the gym because they've likely never stepped foot in one. So I can kind of speak both sides of it. And that's why I started Gym Lawyers. And then, like I said, since sold my gym because it's not worth my time aside from Gym Lawyers to try to keep it going. And this is all I do now is just basically consult with gym owners about all things legal.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to scratch the surface on a lot of topics that are on people's minds right now. So let's kind of start with the beginner gym owner in mind, or like the non brick and mortar person yet that wants to get into it. How should they set up their business, like, and structure it? Should it be LLC? Should it be S Corp? You hear like pros and cons. So I guess like for gym owners, like where would you say that would minimize their liability, maximize their tax benefit at that's getting started, first gym? We'll start there and we'll evolve.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll BS a little bit on my answer with taxes. I can talk enough to be dangerous, but I will always, when I'm veering out of my lane, I'll always say, look, I can bring in a CPA, we can get the answers, but this is generally the topic. All right. So you're a brand new gym owner, or you get to what I call the green light stage. The green light stage is basically when it's not an idea anymore. It's not a concept. We are actively moving toward opening up a gym. And the moment we hit that green light stage, you need to file for a legal entity. Every state has a process to go through, and there are lots of different types of legal entities. The only two we care about are corporations and limited liability companies. So corporations and LLCs. Now, when you say S Corp, that is technically a tax designation, but what you mean in your statement is a corporation. Okay. So it really depends on how the gym owner wants to proceed forward as to whether or not we recommend an LLC or a corporation. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be an LLC because they're probably one person, maybe 2 people. It's going to start off relatively small. They don't need any investments. Okay. They don't need a board of directors and officers and shareholders and the formality that comes along with a corporation. So we just go down the path of a limited liability company. But, if they're looking on bringing in 5 investment buddies who don't really want any control in the corporation, maybe they want an opinion, then there are reasons we may swing over into corporation. But generally speaking, corporations are far more formal and very rarely do we recommend them.
Okay. Well, also in that beginner stage is you're setting up your membership agreement. So like, what are some like must-haves in membership agreements? And if someone doesn't have these things, can they go back and edit them? Does that require re-sign them and they have to, or get that across the finish line? But let's talk membership agreements now. What are some like tips on that?
Yeah, I'll work backwards on your question. So if you don't have all the necessary language in your membership agreement, if you don't even have a membership agreement yet, please let this be the impetus that you need something in writing. Call it a contract, call it an agreement, call it terms and conditions. It's all legally the same thing, whether you're doing month to month, 3 months, 6 months, year, pay in full. It's all a contract. So, but we'll call it an agreement. And then if you start now with a written membership agreement or you update it based on what we talk about, you will have to get everybody to re-sign. Okay. All right. So we go and we get to what would then be phase 3 of opening your gym. So we started with that green light stage. Phase 1 is creating the legal entity. Phase 2 is figure out where you're going to operate, usually in a commercial space. Phase 3 is get your gym contracts put in place so you can open up day 1. There's common contracts are going to be your waiver, your membership agreement, and staff agreements. The first question we need to ask when we're putting together a membership agreement is, what state are you operating in? Does that state have some version of a health club act? Most states do. There's probably about 47 out of the 50 states in the US that require something legal when it comes to the gym taking money. So once we know that there's a Health Club Act, does the gym have to register with the state? Texas, Florida, Virginia, all these states require, and there's a lot of others, but those are the most common ones that we operate with or work with, require state registration. Minnesota just did one in Minnesota, requires state registration. California, New York, they don't require state registration, but there are still hoops you have to jump through. So do they require state registration? Does the Health Club Act then require certain information to go into a membership agreement? Okay. Most of these states are then going to have statutory requirements. So we start there. Oftentimes you have to have the full name, the LLC, and the DBA of the gym, the address, phone number, email address, all the contact information for the gym itself has to be in there. Surprisingly, a lot of membership agreements we review, the gym owners don't put that in there. They just put like the gym's DBA, the branded name, and they miss everything else. So that has to be in there. Then we have to have all the rules and regulations that go along with being a member of the gym. So kind of sometimes silly things like, do you have a clothing requirement? Like, do people have to keep, in CrossFit gyms, it's common you walk in, dudes rip their shirts off and we all work out. A lot of other gyms don't require that or don't allow that. And so therefore, if they have like strict clothing requirements, it seems kind of silly to put that in a membership agreement, but state law is going to require those sorts of rules and regulations to be in there. And then there's oftentimes going to be statutory language associated with cancellations that have to be in the membership agreement. So that's sort of like where we go down statewide, what has to be in the membership agreement. Then beyond that, we are setting as many expectations as we can with the client about what is going to happen with their money. The more of that expectation we can set, the less problems we are going to have involving our memberships. So how often does it automatically renew? What is the automatic renewal schedule? How do I cancel? Can I hold? Is there like a 30-day notice of cancellation? If so, what happens if I give you less than 30 days notice? If you're running credit cards, debit cards, ACH transactions, you need authorization in your membership agreement to do that through what's called an EFT disclosure. We need chargeback protection. So big, long paragraphs that say like, you're authorizing me to take payments and you agree that short of fraud, you will not issue a chargeback. It gives a little bit of additional protection against those chargebacks. And then again, the more gym specific stuff, like if you're doing personal training and you have a 24-hour notice of cancellation of a personal training session, or else the person's going to lose their session, that's going to impact that person financially. We want to put that in a membership agreement. We want the member to acknowledge that in writing so that when we dock them that session and they get momentarily pissed about it, we can say, it's in your membership agreement.
So is this one of those things that like, are you legally, in a bad place if what most people do, they get handed all these terms and conditions, they just scan it and they sign at the bottom? Or do I have to go through every single of these sections and explain it clearly? Like legally, am I in a bad way if I do one versus the other?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and technically not. Something is not more or less enforceable if it's signed. It's not more or less enforceable just because the person says, well, I didn't actually read it. Okay, I just signed it, right? That's their fault. Where you have to be careful, and gyms don't really do this, but if you go to like your car dealership and you go and you buy a car and they go, okay, here's this giant stack of documents. They just sort of like flip through the bottom of the document and say, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. And they don't really give you a chance to review the agreement. That's when just because you signed doesn't mean you automatically agreed to it. That's where they can start to get in trouble. Personally, I think in a lot of gym services, especially coach-led services, not just access gyms, It's beneficial if you're doing some sort of an intro with the client to get them signed up to actually go through the terms. Don't hide it. Don't like gloss over something because you feel like it's not advantageous to the client. They need to know the information just as much as you need them to know the information. So again, we set these expectations. We're going to cut down on the number of disputes.
Because I've been on the receiving end of both, where it was like the rush, like, here's the paperwork, sign up, you can go get a workout. And then they highlight it, and each section needed an initial, and it was like policy, cancel policy. And they give you a little blurb, and you'd initial. And I actually felt more comfortable on that one because I didn't want to read it all, and their little blurb sufficed enough that I felt like I knew what I was signing up for, right? So, that's all good stuff. Now, I'm going to get ahead of myself. I'm going to jump to acquisitions, and then we'll come back to the beginning.
Okay.
Just because we're on agreements. Now, you mentioned the DBA and then the LLC have to be in the agreement. Now, what do we do if we want to sell the gym? Do they have to get a new agreement with their DBA and get all members to now re-sign it? Or can we now lose those contracts and that reoccurring revenue if they don't sign it?
Yeah, that's a really sticky situation when it comes to gym sales. Anytime we're talking about selling a gym or buying a gym, there are two types of sales involved, either a stock sale or an asset sale, right? A stock sale is literally me selling you my whole legal entity. So let's just, for these purposes, I'll call my LLC Match Gym LLC, okay? And maybe I do business as the sweatshop, all right? But Match Gym LLC is a legal entity that has liabilities, it has assets, okay? I can actually sell that whole legal entity to you, and you come in as the new owner of the legal entity and everything that comes along with it. And there are pros and cons. I'm happy to go into the weeds if you want me to on a stock sale. But in that instance, that's most advantageous at times for a buyer, again, pros and cons, because we then don't have to change anything. The LLC stays the same, the DBA stays the same, members have already signed it, okay? Maybe the only thing that we would need to change is if like the old owner's name was on some sort of a membership agreement, that might require some sort of an updating. We would have to get everybody to re-sign. But if you're using new client management software like PushPress, Wodify, Kilo, MindBody, Zen Planner, we don't usually need the gym owner to have any kind of a signature portion on that agreement. It's just the client that's signing it. If we go into an asset sale, that is what it sounds like. You're coming in with your own LLC and you're just buying all the assets of Matt's Gym LLC. Typically in a gym, this means the equipment. Every physical piece of equipment that's in those four walls, your LLC would presumably re-sign on the lease. And then in that instance, yes, you would have to get everybody to re-sign your waiver, your membership agreement. And there are ways that we can word the ultimate purchase agreements when we're assisting with buyers to try to help protect from like a mass exodus of the buyer taking over. But in this industry, that is a big risk. And there are also states that require specific language to be in a membership agreement if the current gym owner is going to try to sell essentially that credit card information for each one of the clients to a buyer.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that definitely, gets that cleared up. So now we're going to go to them getting their lease, right? They just started up a gym, decided LLC or Corp. They're getting their membership agreement. What are common mistakes you see gym owners make when they get their lease signed? Like for me, talking to a gym owner actually today, lease is responsible for everything to be fixed on the inside and on the outside. So when the AC busted, he had to just buy a $15,000 brand new AC to get crane. And it wasn't even the AC cost that much. It was like the crane was 10 grand to just come and lift it up. And so it was just an outrageous, and I was just like scratching my head. I was just like, every lease I signed, I was only responsible for the inside repairs and the landlord fixing on the outside. So, learning lesson for him. And they say in every transaction, one person gets the money and one person gets the lesson. So he had to get the lesson.
He got the lesson on that one. Yeah.
So, for you, what are, I guess, it could be horror stories or just things that you see that you're like, you got to make sure you check these things before you sign that lease. All right.
Right, right. Yeah, we could do an hour-long episode on horror stories that we deal with with gym owners and commercial leases. Um, but perhaps the biggest mistake is twofold. One, the gym owner doesn't have anybody review the lease. Or two, they don't have somebody who knows the needs of a gym review the lease prior to signing. So, and again, I'm not like tapping myself on the back, but this is why I exist, because if you go to the attorney down the street, even if they're a commercial real estate attorney, they don't know what to look for in a lease because they don't know what's going to impact a gym in a commercial lease. Now, any attorney should be able to look at that lease and say, you realize you're responsible for the repair or the replacement of the HVAC system. That's not a good idea. So we need to go through a series of steps to try to protect you against the responsibility of replacement of the HVAC system. Some landlords are just going to put their foot down and say no, and that's just a risk the gym owner has to accept. But understand, from a gym owner's perspective, when you're starting a gym, you don't have any money yet. Maybe if this is a second location, you do. But if this is your first location, you're a brand new gym owner, you are about to sign probably the second, if not the biggest legal contract of your life. Okay. Second, maybe to a mortgage, depending on how expensive your house is. But otherwise, your average commercial lease is probably for a gym. It's going to be somewhere around $3,000 to $5,000 a month times 12 months times the average lifespan of a gym lease is 5 years. So do the math, and then you're legally going to tell somebody, I guarantee you, I will pay you this money. That's a big deal. And you need to know what you are signing. You got to know the pros and cons of this thing before you sign it, because the horror stories that we get from gym owners who didn't, even if you do have us read, we can't predict everything that's going to come up, but we're going to catch a lot of it from the beginning. One big issue, if you want me to go down a list, noise, that's a number one issue of gym owners, depending on the type of gym that you're running, is nobody prepares the landlord or the other tenants for how much noise you're about to make. You get in there, you didn't have any protections in your lease against noise ordinances, and you start creating a whole bunch of noise, the landlord tries to boot you out of the space. That's the most common problem. But beyond that, another one, a big one that keeps popping up is zoning ordinances and permitting. So just because it's a commercial space does not mean it is zoned for commercial use as a fitness facility. And landlords will oftentimes put language in the lease that says it's not their fault if the space is not zoned or permitted properly for the use. And if it's discovered after signing the lease that it's not zoned for a gym, and the town comes or the city comes knocking on your door, gym owner, you can't get out of your lease. It's not the landlord's fault if you sign that provision in the lease that says so. So that one causes a big problem also.
It's funny you say that. That's one I'm literally going through at one of my gyms that's been open 8 years, pay our business license every year. Somebody at the city just made an oopsie mistake and passed it off because it was previously like a warehouse shop, and then now leased it to us, and we're a gym. It's a different usage, different amount of traffic. So it's not a cheap mistake either. I had to pay an architect $2,000 and then now an additional $8,000. So it's going to be a $10K thing because the landlord said, hey, in the lease, like, we don't have, if there's any issues with the city, we're not footing the bill. Right. And it was one of those things where they had the blueprint and the architect at some point of the city. Someone lost the old building since the 40s. Somehow it got lost. Someone decided to look into us and decided that it doesn't exist and we need to get it on file. So very, very real thing that you're bringing up right there. So, but one is my next questions is, about being ADA compliant. I don't know if that's something that
I was going to go down that route. Yep.
Okay. So at this gym I have, because it was built in the 40s, it's like, again, an old building, but it's like a really nice town where they're just like rebuilding all these old buildings to have new modern designs. The bathrooms are definitely not ADA compliant, but they're like cement. Like, this thing was like poured cement and we're grandfathered in terms of it not needing structural, changes, because it would literally need to be somebody to come and sledgehammer these things down and rebuild and re-pour a whole new cement structure. So those are things that come up when you're going through this, it's like ramps and the doors being wide enough and all these types of things. So like, what are just, I guess, things that you would want to caution gym owners when it comes to being ADA compliant as well?
Yeah. So backstory just a little bit so people can kind of understand what we're talking about. ADA, short for Americans with Disabilities Act. There are two things that gym owners need to be concerned about on a broad base when it comes to the ADA. The first one is access, and the second one is services. So first, the primary one that if you have like a coach-led gym, again, I'll keep using CrossFit because it's just like an easy one to talk about. But if it's personal training, if it's powerlifting, but it's basically a big open space with a bunch of free weights, that gym owner really just needs to be worried about access. Okay, there's enough material out there about being able to make reasonable accommodations for the service provider to somebody who's oftentimes we're going to be talking about somebody in a wheelchair. Okay. Yep. Maybe they're deaf, maybe they're blind, but a deaf or a blind person probably isn't going to have an issue with access. They just may need to be, led in, where somebody with a wheelchair is going to have an issue with access. Now, if we're talking to a gym, like a 24-hour gym that has a bunch of equipment and a bunch of machines and everything else, we also have to be concerned about access because the ADA is going to require certain spacing, certain heights, in order so that somebody oftentimes with a wheelchair can get around. All right. Now, with that said, the big problem the gym owner has to understand is you cannot wait until you have to have an accommodation in order to make sure that your space is accommodating. In other words, if, like my gym, we never had this issue, thankfully. I sold it before it was, but when you walked up the parking, you parked in the parking lot and you walked up sort of like an alley in order to get into my gym. And then there was like let's call it an 8-inch step up into my space. Technically speaking, I cannot wait until somebody shows up in a wheelchair in order to figure out whether or not how am I going to get this person into the space? Okay. At that point, that person with a wheelchair technically has a claim to the Department of Justice and your local building inspectors that your location is not ADA compliant, and that's a problem, okay? So we got to think about these things at the time that we're signing the lease. I'm bringing it back to the lease because there's oftentimes in that same paragraph that I was just talking about a moment ago where a landlord is going to waive any issues with permitting or zoning, it's also going to waive any issues that come with the ADA, because it's going to say, well, the gym, you're accepting the space as is. We make no statements or affirmations at all about its ADA compliance. And it's a big problem for gym owners. I had a client who had a client in a wheelchair for years. The client was apparently loved the gym the entire time that client was a client of that gym until there was an issue, and then that client left and called the Department of Justice and made a claim that the gym was not ADA compliant. The Department of Justice came down on that gym hard. And we went to the landlord. We pulled the lease and we went to the landlord. I went to the Department of Justice and I said, you got to pull the landlord in this as well, because the ADA says owners and operators are both liable. So the building owner, the landlord, and the gym owner are technically both liable under the ADA, except the lease said that the tenant, because they didn't have us review it beforehand, the tenant agreed to indemnify the landlord from any issues that came up from an ADA violation. So, the first offense for an ADA violation can be upwards of $100,000 fine. So it's a big deal. And, there's different ways we'll work with the gym owner through those issues, but more often than not, it's just you either need to go back to the landlord and get written confirmation from the landlord that the space is ADA compliant, or you got to work with the landlord to try to get the space compliant, or you understand that there's a potential issue that's going to pop up down the road and you're accepting that as a potential risk. And one other note on that, you mentioned grandfathering. There are very rare circumstances that a space is actually grandfathered in. So yours, yeah, if it's concreted in like that, the ADA can't require mass expensive structural changes. But a lot of landlords try to get out of this just by saying, oh, we're grandfathered in. It's not just that easy. Right?
Yes.
So we've got to dig a little deeper.
Gym owners, let's be real. You don't love lead follow-up, and that's why I started Gym Reinforcement, so you can pass it over to us, because that's probably not why you started a gym. That's not what you love to do in business, is to chase leads down all day long. Well, hey, hand that over to me and my team of remote sales reps. We're going to text them, call them, email them, social media, DM them. We're going to do all the channels so that you don't got to worry about it, and you know they're going to get reached out to quickly. And that is what we do at Gym Reinforcements. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of AI and bots and automations out there that can reach out to your leads. But let's be honest, it's not very good, and people could tell right away. You probably would rather to have human-to-human customer service from start to finish, meaning from when they opt in to when they get serviced by your coaches. We want to have that exist throughout the whole client journey. So let us step in, let us engage your leads, let us sell them for you. And that way you can do what you do best and serve them and get them results. So if you want to book a call, go to gymreinforcements.com and we'll talk soon. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears into fees. I got a lot of questions about various fees. And so we got a list over here in a sec, but like, which of these fees, like what are the legal limitations on them? Can I charge this? Is this even legal? Or am I making fees out of thin air and I'm going to get in trouble? So the first one's an obvious one, is the cancel and the early termination fee. Can you contractually hold someone to that, at the gym, or is that something that, is not possible? Another one I'll just bunch in there and we'll continue on, is a freeze fee. Some gyms have said, hey, we're going to lock in your rate. Maybe we charge you $150 a month. You want to freeze for 2 months. To keep your rate locked in, we're going to charge you $30 freeze fee. And then you start your membership. So I guess we'll start with those two fees. What are your thoughts?
Okay. This is where I kind of go down the line. I can't get away from it depends in some sense.
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
Because different states are going to handle different fees differently. All right. For example, California, I talked earlier about certain language that has to go into a membership agreement, right, based on state laws. California is one state that just immediately comes to mind, that depending on how much you're charging, may require additional language to be put in your membership agreement. Okay. Now, the next thing is, you said, is any of this, is something like a 30-day notice of cancellation enforceable?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes, if you have a written membership agreement that says you owe me a 30-day notice of cancellation, and if you give me less than 30 days, I'm going to take the next payment. If I put that in front of you and you sign it as my member, you have contractually agreed that I can take that fee. Okay. But then you give me 20 days notice and I go ahead and hit you with that, and you issue a charge back, and I go, what the hell? You signed a legal contract. Now we really start to walk into this. What is the cost benefit analysis of trying to enforce this? Okay. And there's oftentimes that the conversation that I have with a gym owner is, you have to have a membership agreement. You have to put this stuff in the membership agreement. And depending on what we're talking about, if you can catch 70, 80, 90 people, 90% of people with your agreement, I say catch, but like if 70, 80, 90% of people actually follow the agreement, then you're good. More often than not, that one person that pushes back against it, it's not going to be worth your time and effort to try to enforce it. Because what are we going to do? We're going to sue them over $150 a month. We're going to sue them over $200 a month because I didn't get my final payment when you didn't want to come anymore. Okay. And then the next layer on top of that is, you better make sure that your house is stable if you're going to start fighting something like this. And what I mean by that is, you better make sure your legal entity is set up properly, because you don't want to expose that. If your state requires registration, you better make sure that your gym is registered properly. You better make sure your membership agreement has all of the state requirement language in it, because if not, one, that membership agreement is completely null and void under the law. Two, you're not following the law. So you've just exposed yourself to what are called treble damages or potentially criminal charges, depending on the state. If an attorney turns around and blows the whistle on you because you tried to enforce a membership agreement when it's not valid to enforce to begin with. Okay. So that's a lot of time conversations we have to have with gym owners is like, I get it. I get that it sucks, especially when like, they're like, well, I'm not going to pay you or else, I'm going to give you a 1-star review on Google, which is like this fear of God put in a gym owner. Right. Yeah. And so we don't enforce it. And then we're like, well, why the hell do we have a contract then? And in all honesty, it's so that, we avoid most of those issues because we set the expectation. And then that one a-hole, it is not worth your effective hourly rate to go after that guy or girl, person.
Okay. So others that have came up there a little bit, I guess, newer are a missed session fee. So I've heard of things like Orange Theory and others saying, hey, if you book in and you don't cancel within an hour of that session time, and we're charging you $25. So that type of fee. And then another one was a facility improvement fee. That's more annual, like once a year, $200, $100. We're going to take it. We're going to spruce up the place. So what's your take on those? Are those enforceable?
Yeah. So something like you need to cancel within an hour of your session or else, we're going to charge you a $10 fee. We'll double check state laws just to make sure that doesn't violate some sort of consumer protection law in your state. But 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. You may be pissing off your client. I always did. I charged $10 and it always amazed me. Like I used to make like $1,200 every 6 months in extra fees because people would just cancel and pay the fee. And I was like, I'm not going to cancel and pay that $10 fee, but they didn't seem to care. But generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you have it in writing, as long as it's contractually agreed to, as long as the member isn't pushing it, as long as your membership agreement is otherwise compliant. And then you mentioned like a hold fee as well. Again, nothing wrong with that as long as the member has agreed to it. Where gyms walk into issues with this is like, they never tell the member because they're worried about scaring the member when the member's signing up. And then all of a sudden they nail them with a fee and the member sends an email like, what the heck? Why am I getting charged of this fee? That's the email that you want to avoid.
How could they navigate? Like, let's say their original contract didn't have a fee, but they decided they want to add this fee. Do I have to get like an addendum and get it to all the members? And what do you do for the people who don't sign it? Do they just get to skip that fee and be sitting on the sidelines? Like,
that's a hard conversation. Yep. Yeah. Because anytime we want to make updates, if we want those updates to apply to everybody, we have to get everybody to re-sign. And if somebody rejects re-signing, that then sticks the gym owner in a spot of like, well, am I not going to have this person be a member anymore? Am I not going to enforce this against this member? Or is this change really not that big of a deal? And I'm not going to make it a big, I'm just not going to do it. So these are considerations of, things that we want to make sure are in place when the gym first opens. Or, if the gym is like, well, I'm going to raise rates anyway. So like, I'm going to throw a 15% increase come January 1 anyway. And I'm going to piss off a bunch of people anyway, that we might as well just go ahead and start stuffing some of this stuff in the membership agreement because everybody's going to have to re-sign. And, it's all just going to get washed out. And we all know the issues with raising rates with, if you raise your rates enough to compensate for the 4 or 5 people who are going to leave because you raised rates, then you're still good to go.
Yeah. Yep.
What was the other fee you asked about? There was one other one.
Like an annual facility improvement.
Oh, that one is going to be very state specific. Most states are going to look at that as what's considered an initiation fee. And so some states don't care about initiation fees. Other states do and say, like Florida, it has this like vague ass language of like, you can't charge an unreasonable initiation fee, but doesn't tell you what is or is not an unreasonable initiation fee. So, there's other red tape. If a gym's going to do that, there's some potentially other red tape that they're going to have to jump through. So if that's on the thought, or if that's something that a gym currently does, they really should have somebody like us just double check where you're located to make sure that doesn't come back to haunt you.
Yeah, and to owners that do that, I say, hey, you could do that, or you can just raise whatever you plan to charge and build it into your membership rates and raise your rates. Because the downside of putting too many fees like this is people start to feel like you're nickel and diming them. If I cancel, annual membership, if I freeze, and so that can turn on you. So I just like raise your standard rates and just have less small hidden fees all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And another question that came up was like, how could they win people who do dispute charges? So it sounds like what you're saying is like, if it's in the language and you got the signature, that's how you're going to win disputes that people try to like fight, right? Like that's the main thing in their corner is the agreement.
Sure. Yeah, let's go down chargebacks briefly. So chargebacks are like the word, they're getting out of hand at the immediate moment. And until the federal government comes out and regulates them somehow, they're just going to keep getting worse, because when chargebacks were created way back when, probably like a decade or so ago, in order to avoid fraudulent charges on your credit card, right? Like you just did a 10-week trip in Europe, and all of a sudden you get a $500 charge in the United States, and clearly it wasn't you. You can get a hold of your credit card company and say, that wasn't me, please give me my money back. All right. That's what they were designed for. Now it's becoming like, well, I didn't go to the gym for 3 months, even though I agreed to pay. And so I want my money back because I didn't go. And they issue a chargeback. And credit cards were just, okay, here you go. And the gym owners left like, again, what the hell?
I think they side with their customers because the customers are paying them and they don't have any connection to you. So they're like, we'll easily go against you and side with them and make them a happy customer,
Yes, exactly. So it's not in the credit card company's advantage to side with the gym owner. Mm-hmm. So our conversations typically around chargebacks is, if you're coming to me and saying, how can I set my gym up to beat the chargeback? We're having the wrong conversation. They need to talk with you about what are systems we can put in place to avoid the chargeback. Okay. Our membership agreement is written in order to set the expectation so that we avoid as many chargebacks as possible. If you got all these fees, if you have a 30-day notice, the two most common are people who are paying for the gym and not using them, or quote unquote punishment fees like 30-day notice of cancellation, but I'm going to take your payment if you give me less than 30 days. Okay. Those are where we see the most chargebacks. If we put that in a membership agreement and we set that expectation, again, it's going to head off the majority of them. If we never put that in a membership agreement and all of a sudden we're nailing a bunch of people with the last payment because they didn't give us a 30-day notice of cancellation, but they didn't know that, we're obviously going to get more and more chargeback requests. Now, once we get a chargeback, the question is, was the gym authorized to take that payment? If the gym has no evidence that they were authorized to take the payment, they will automatically lose. If a gym is taking ACH transactions, they will automatically lose. You don't get a chance to fight a chargeback from an ACH. But if you have a debit or credit card, we can put together the evidence with, here's the signed membership agreement, here's the highlighted language, here's the automatic email that goes out with every payment every month. They know exactly what it is that they're signing up for. Here's their attendance record of every time that they came. And we submit that all over to the insurance company. No guarantee, but we've set the gym up as best as we can to avoid and then fight the chargeback.
Yes. Okay. That's all good. I think that's super valuable because I think a lot of gym owners are just taking the punch on the chin. And I've always, like you said, almost made a case for why these were good charges. They were not fraudulent, and we win a majority of ours because of that. And I think it's just trying. Like, I think they just are going to do it, and they're going to dispute, and they're going to side with them. And then people who actually try to fight it, they'll say, okay, you win. And then they'll side with you. But most people don't try, and then they don't get their money back. So, all right, well, let's go into some acquisitions because, again, I know we're coming up on the end of our time, but this was
we're good
questions. So one of them was like, hey, a gym owner is looking to buy local competition. What should they be looking at to make sure there's no hidden liability? I know we brought up stock and asset. Obviously, stock, is there a way to check a liability has, or is it just like, you're depending on the owner's forthcoming when you're stepping into it, like.
Yeah. So, and again, just to kind of be clear, you're talking about they're buying a competitive gym in town. They want to,
another gym in town that they're gonna. Yeah,
there's different types of liability that we're going to look into. For due diligence is a process you'll be familiar with, but other people may not. The buying process essentially starts with a letter of intent. Okay, a buyer comes in, they basically put all the terms down in written form that says essentially, hey, Dustin, I want to buy your gym. This is the price I'm willing to offer. These are all the conditions that we have to meet in order to get this thing to close. Are you in agreement? Okay. Once you and I are in agreement on a letter of intent, we then enter into the due diligence stage. And that is my chance as a buyer to basically go in and pick your gym apart in order to determine whether or not it's worth the $100,000 I offer to buy it. The higher the purchase price, the more diligent we are going to be about our due diligence. Okay. So there's different types of liability that we're going to look into here. Things like, are there UCC liens on the equipment because the gym owner took an EIDL loan back in COVID that they haven't paid off? Okay. Do they have written membership agreements that are actually valid, do actually comply with the law, and we can, as a buyer, go in and say, we're just going to transfer this membership agreement over to us? Or is there nothing? So there's like nothing at all providing any kind of a guarantee or promise that this member is going to continue after the purchase. What does their liability waiver look like? Is it a piece of crap? And if so, that's a potential issue. But we talked, and you just brought up a moment, stock sale versus asset sale. A con, we talked about the pro of a buyer doing a stock sale is basically like it's pull you out, put me in, nothing else changes. The con of a stock sale is me taking over your LLC. I've just absorbed any tail of personal injury liability, potentially for, depending on the state, majority of the time it's 2 years. Okay. And you, as the seller, may not even know about it. If somebody 2 weeks ago got injured, they hurt their back and went, I don't know if it's really anything. But then it keeps getting worse, keeps getting worse. And within the next 2 years, they decide that my back is actually really hurt. And it's because Dustin told me to pick up a 450-pound deadlift when I shouldn't have done it. And therefore, I think Dustin is liable for injuring me. We can argue the efficacy of that claim, but that's the claim. There's nothing stopping this person from bringing that lawsuit if an attorney agrees against your gym. If I go in and buy the stock of your company, I just absorbed that liability. Okay. Great for a seller's perspective because you don't have to worry about that anymore. Bad for the buyer's perspective, which is why majority of gym buying and selling is done on asset purchases. So the buyer just comes in and buys all of the equipment. You as the seller, I'm not getting your LLC. You maintain that liability for 2 years afterwards.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, good things to point out. I personally I know this is more like purchase price type of stuff and deal structure, but I like to always have a seller note because when it's 100% paid out, the owner can just completely turn off their brain about the success of the gym. You kind of want a little skin in the game, even if it's 10% of the purchase price, a seller note over a few years, because then they're going to stay in contact with you. They have a dog in the race. If they want that paycheck to keep flowing, it's in their best interest to talk to you and coach you through the issues. So that's something that I think about too in buying competition. And then, I don't know if this is something you can speak to, but I've always heard it said that you want equipment as high as possible for tax reasons when you're selling, but you want as low as possible when you're buying. So yeah, I guess, or I could have it reversed actually. I think it's actually when you're
I think it's reversed.
Yeah, and again, you want the price lower.
we could be both out of our own lanes right now, but let's plant some seeds in some gym owner heads to go talk to your CPA. We have CPAs, that we bring into ourselves if we need to, but there is the breakdown of acquisition of assets, and the federal government, I think the IRS has 7 classes of allocation. And so I think class 5 is the one that gym owners typically fall into, which is equipment. Okay. And I think, no shit. I think you did have it backwards. I think the seller wants, and I think class 6 or 7 is for goodwill. And so the seller wants the equipment, the class 5 to be as low as possible allocation, and the goodwill to be as high as possible.
Yep.
The buyer wants it to be the other way around. So it's all part of negotiation on how we want to allocate the purchase price.
And again, from experience, sold a gym, put the legitimate value, and then I got this big tax bill. What the heck what's this for? And they're like, oh, you got to pay taxes on the equipment you sold. I'm like, what? And so, there's always like a hidden tax somewhere, but I learned on future sales, don't do that. Right.
And it will also, your own personal tax bracket will impact that as well.
Absolutely.
Which was an issue with my gym sale is I did it 50-50 because I didn't want to haggle over anything. So I was just like, we're going to do 50% of the sale to equipment, 50% of the sale to goodwill. And then, talked to my accountant. He was like, oh yeah. And because you're in a higher tax bracket, you're going to lose more of the class 5 taxes through taxes. So lots of things to just like, there's always ways to like kind of game this. And this is a large part of why I exist, in the sense of when we started, a lot of gym owners, I would get calls and be like, oh yeah, I sold my gym, or I bought my gym last year. We just did a handshake. And I'm like, oh God, no, you can't do that. Please don't do that. We will navigate this for you.
Yes. So kind of just flipping that, we talked someone buying their competition, but there's a good, it just happened with you. I've sold gyms in the last year. Like there is a good amount of people who I think are hitting that age where they've done it for 10 or 15 years and it's time to pass the torch. And so, there's that big spark of gyms being open in the 2010s to the 2020s. And so it just happens, it's, turnover. So if somebody is trying to get ready to sell, I guess just pieces of advice for them to shore things up and to make sure it's good to go so that they can, sell it. I know my only thing, because again, I'm thinking purchase price that you want to get the most for it, is you got to start showing more of your profit, and pay those taxes. I know it's not fun, and writing off less, because you're not going to be able to get the maximum purchase price that you're looking for if you just write it all off and show it as a loss. You know what I mean?
Right.
Oh,
your EBITDA is going to go down if you're writing stuff off. But sorry. The question is
just advice for someone looking to sell, that they should be doing to prep and to get the most purchase price, and also to protect themselves legally.
So when the gym owner comes and says, I'm getting ready to sell my gym, or I want to kind of get my gym ready to be sold, what do we need to do? There's the financial aspect of it, which is, you were just talking about, and they need to, if the gym is working with somebody like you or another mentor program, oftentimes you guys know enough at least to be dangerous and to help the gyms position themselves, like you just said, like, stop paying for every little thing out of the gym, because we don't want that to actually be a line item on your expenses. We got to increase your net profit so that, or at least what we're showing is your net profit, so that we can increase the essentially what is an EBITDA. That's an accounting term. That's a real basic, simple way of figuring out what your gym is worth on a, and then we take it like times 30 or 3.5 or 4, depending on the industry. But anyway, we have to get that number up as much as possible. And there are other companies that we work with who like specialize in this sort of thing of, working with the gym to make it look financially as beneficial as possible. From my perspective, legally, we're going to audit pretty much everything from a legal aspect, from what we think, like you said, a buyer is going to come in and going to look at this business, and they're going to want to see, does it look dangerous, essentially? Is the membership agreement up to speed? Does the membership agreement have the required language in it for the gym owner to sell the credit card information of the member? Is a buyer going to come in and be like, I don't think you're very secure at all, and I'm basically going to pay you for your equipment because I have no assurance whatsoever that the day after closing, everybody's not just going to peace out. Gym owner and the selling gym owner and I need to talk about, like, what's your liability waiver look like? Are you wanting to sell the whole stock? Because if so, this 1-page liability waiver is going to scare away a lot of buyers who want to come in and buy the stock of your gym. So there are things that we can look at mainly it's financial, but there are things from a legal perspective that we can look at and say, legally, these are the things we can button up so we can raise that, what your gym, how it looks safety-wise a little bit more so that a buyer can come in and see, oh, you want $150,000 for this based on the financials? Okay, I think your legal stuff looks good too. This looks like a real business. I'm willing to buy it.
And what about like lease transfer, ability? Like sometimes leases have language about it transferring. Sometimes they don't. What do you tend to see when people are buying or selling a gym? Is that usually found in there or not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Most of them are. I've never seen a commercial lease that does not have an assignment and sublease provision. So that's the other conversation. Next part of the conversation with either a buyer or a seller is we have a buyer and we have a seller and we have the unwanted third party, the landlord. And most leases are going to say you cannot get out of this lease without permission from the landlord. So if we never talk to the landlord and we get to the point of close and the buyer tries to go in there and take over the lease, that landlord can pull the strings on that real fast.
I had that happen. I had a landlord, they only asked for first and last for me, but they asked 3 payments from them, first, last, and an extra one. And so they were trying to budget cash flow, working capital. And then they're like, whoa, like I gotta give you 3 payments of the lease in advance. And I was eventually able to work the relationship and get them to match it. But they saw them, because they were a general manager where, I'm a multi-location gym owner. Yeah. They saw them as higher risk. They wanted more money down. And so, like those things can come up, to your point. And that was like, as we're getting closer to closing, then the surprise pops up like, whoa.
Yep. So we'll oftentimes bake that into our documentation to say, from both sides, like whether you're a seller or representing the buyer, it doesn't matter. We have to have a condition to close. We've got to be able to work that commercial lease. And there's going to be two kinds of potential transfers, if you will, of a commercial lease, both of which have pros and cons to the buyer or the seller. The landlord could choose to assign the lease, okay, which simply means the buyer gets brought on essentially as an additional tenant. The seller maintains the liability under the lease in addition to the buyer for the remainder of the current lease term, okay? Easy for the landlord to bring in a buyer, easy for a buyer to come in and sign. Great, because then the buyer also gets to share liability with the seller. Bad for the seller because the seller has to maintain liability. As opposed to just a brand new lease, breaks the lease with the seller, starts a whole new lease with the buyer. Really great for the seller because the seller gets out from under the liability of the lease. Bad for the buyer because, like in your case, now the landlord can change the terms.
Change pricing I've seen, change triple net, all that change because they're trying to make it match maybe market value.
Bring it up to fair market value. That's right. Yep. So these are all just parts of the fun little intricacies that I think are sexy and fun to talk about, which is why I do this. And then gym owners can come to me and I can just say, look, I'll take care of it all. Yeah. You just be ready to answer some questions from me.
Love it. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap. So where should they come and find you if they need help with all things legal? Again, you specialize in gym owners, which is awesome, and gym businesses. So where could they get into contact?
Easiest way is just to go to the website, which is gymlawyers.com. That's GYMLAWYERS.com. We have calls to action all over the site. My direct email is on there. My personal cell phone's on there. Like, I'm not hiding from you. But if you go on and you just request a call through one of the calls to action, you'll immediately get my calendar. You can grab 45 minutes for a discovery call. So that's the easiest way. Don't cold call me. I'm probably not going to pick up your call.
Fair enough. I think that's a fair ask. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the call, man. Again, I didn't even get through all the questions. We had a few more, so we'll definitely have to book a follow-up.
Do another one.
Because I think this is something, again, this is the world that people have a lot of questions, and to your point, there's not enough answers. There's not enough resources. And so it's very refreshing to be able to tap into that and get your wealth of knowledge. So again, thank you for sharing what you did today.
Thank you.
Gym owners, I want to officially invite you into my free Facebook group just for you. It's called Fitness Sales Made Simple. And essentially, I'm sharing free resources in there all the time to help you grow your business. Doesn't matter to me if you ever work with gym reinforcements, you can gather all kinds of cool content and tools and resources. We have free webinar trainings, free guides, free lead magnets, free scripts that you can send out to make sales, and it's all in the group. So go ahead and click on the link in the description and you could get inside and get these free tools. See you on the inside.